Welcome to week 3 of the Map Battle League. This week my opponent will be Wakalok, and the two maps we'll be playing on will be Andorra Vella and the Pacific Ocean. We'll get right into it with the capital of Andorra. Now this is a pretty small city map, so there is going to be little room for error. Okay, so right away we start by a roundabout. Now there are several roundabouts across the city, and they're all fairly distinct, so after a bit of practice you can learn to at least pick out which ones are in the right area. This one in particular with the fountain is next to this rather official looking building, so it was pretty easy to pinpoint after having seen it in a few practice rounds before. So a nice 5,000 points to start us off. This is a map that I put in a bit of practice to, so I'm expecting to get a perfect score out of it. On to our second round. Now this area can be a little trickier because it is in some of these tighter side roads that exist in the, I guess, downtown area, if you want to call it that. The problem is that they're not super obvious on the map itself. As some of these smaller streets, you do have to zoom in quite a bit before you can actually see the name pop up on them. So first of all, we're just going to look for an actual road sign, and we do see the one we're looking for. We can see we're on St. Salvador, which is convenient because we have seen that before. But again, it's a question of zooming in and finding the right one of these smaller roads within this area, as it's not going to pop up right away. So we'll take a little bit of time here and see if we can actually see it jump out on the map to us. Yeah, looking through all these streets because we do know it's one of these guys in the area, but just not seeing it pop up yet. So we're going to go a bit farther down the street, see if we can get another crossroad that we can use that might jump out a little faster. Okay, and that one also does look familiar as well. So now we're just got to go in and actually find it because we do know the area it's in roughly. It's just a matter of scanning these streets until the correct one pops up. And there we go. We have located it. We are at the intersection, so we just got to go back and make sure we pinpoint it in the right spot. And there we go. Close enough to get that perfect score. And I do notice that my opponent, unfortunately, did not manage to pinpoint this particular round. So that does give me a bit of breathing space going forward, knowing that, okay, we just got to make sure we get the right areas for the next 3 rounds, and we should be able to clean it up. So moving on, we have one of the streets that is to the north of the city right away, because you can see the city's off to the south, and it is a little bit up in the hills. So we're going to continue down the road and through these curves until we can figure out exactly which one we are on. And it does look relatively familiar. I feel like I have been here in one of the practice runs before, but again, it's going to be a matter of finding the road that it jumps back into and then at least nailing that down. So we're at a roundabout, so we're going to start looking through some of these. And in my mind, I'm trying to remember, are we on the east or west side of the city? So initially I'm thinking, yeah, that looks good, and zoom in on that roundabout, and unfortunately that was actually the correct one. So whatever what it was about it, I didn't necessarily recognize the street right off the bat. So we're going to go through and take a look at some other areas to see if any of them match up. But at the end of the day, it's going to take us all the way back there once we do realize that, yes, we were looking at the right place in the first spot. Yeah, Dela Closas definitely seems familiar. And that's why now I'm thinking, okay, I feel like I've seen this on the western side of the city somewhere. So it should be west of that major roadway. Still going to check up here for some of these curved roads up in the hills just to make sure I'm not mistaking it for somewhere else. Yeah, we're searching for a crossroad in the other direction from where we started, just to see if we can find anything that'll help us confirm. Okay, and we have finally seen the right name of the street, and the curves do match up with those switchbacks that we were going through initially. So now it's a question of just finding the right part of the road to pinpoint. We've got 40 seconds left, which should be more than enough time. Okay, we realized that going off to the east does not hit any more curves, and in fact, there is some side roads already nearby it, so we're a little confused because that doesn't seem to be matching up with the area we're on. But I haven't yet realized with 20 seconds to go that I need to be searching a lot farther to the east in this scenario. Now I realize it. I see, oh, yep, there's that side road that we were nearby. And unfortunately, at this point, I should have been using the buildings off to our south a little better to actually do the pinpointing. And I moved that marker at the last moment, which was a mistake because it did cost me some points in the end. So with 0 seconds, yes, it was right where I had my marker initially. And that's really disappointing because I lost about 600 points there. It's not catastrophic because we still have the advantage over the opponent, but considering we actually got the location right, it's really disappointing to drop a perfect score or a perfect game on a location like that, where you did actually figure out where it was and just failed to pinpoint it due to the lack of time, which was a consequence of not being quick enough to identify the right area in the first place. So this next site, we're on the river, and we do see that Novotel Hotel, which is a fairly recognizable spot within the city. So again, we already know the area we're in pretty quickly. It's just a matter of pinpointing it and making sure we're on the right side of the river. We got the orientation of the road, but we have not realized yet that we're actually on the east side of the river and not the west side. So we do need to get some crossroads here to figure out which streets we're next to, and there's a good sign. We do have plenty of time, though, 2 full minutes, so we're not in a rush, knowing that it's better to be careful with this than to throw away another perfect round. But as I say that, I decide with almost 2 minutes to spare to throw down the pin in what is actually the wrong spot and cost myself a bunch of points unnecessarily. I had so much time on the clock, I could have easily taken the time to pinpoint that. For whatever reason, I got turned around and confused and must have thought that the street I saw was to my north instead of to my south. So I did drop 800 points there, which is really shocking considering I had the right spot very quickly and just got sloppy and didn't pinpoint it. Cost myself 800 points there, which again, because of my opponent's mistake in round 2, it still gives me an advantage going into the final round. It does ramp up the pressure a little bit because I do know I need to get this perfect. But yeah, disappointing to say the least. You want to see a better performance out of that. This location, pretty quickly able to identify, as this general area did come up a lot in some of the practice rounds I did. That soccer field in particular is pretty common, or at least a good landmark that you can recognize for places nearby it. So we do know the side street that we're on. It's just a matter of pinpointing it now pretty quickly. We do see the building to our south has a nice section that's jutting out of it, so we can use that to help pinpoint it. And yes, there is the perfect score. So overall, I managed to squeak out the win against my opponent, although it is disappointing because, there was a perfect score was easily attainable, and I dropped over 1,000 points on very needless mistakes, just not taking enough of my time on locations where I already had it. And in this kind of competition, there's enough points you want to drop, and throwing away a good perfect score and the bonus that would come with that really is hard to swallow, but that's how it pans out. So happy enough to take the win, and we can move on to the next one. Next up, we have the Pacific Ocean map, which will be locations all in proximity to the Pacific Ocean. There is quite a wide range of locations we could be dealing with here, but at least we do have the coastlines to work with, which should be pretty helpful. So right away, we're into our first location, looking pretty tropical, looking pretty American, and yes, right away you can see it is Hawaii. So that does narrow it down quite a bit. It is now a question of just nailing down where we are, and we can see the tour bus there for Waikiki, so we should know that it is on Oahu, but we just got to remember exactly where it's at. Thankfully, there is going to be a lot of clues nearby to help us pinpoint this in the right spot. Yep, and just in case we weren't sure, there is the sign for Oahu. And Waikiki is a pretty well-known beach nearby Honolulu, so we've zoomed in on that. Now it's just a question of figuring out where in that area we are. We did start in a car park, so we're going to look around and see what kind of streets, and with the water on the east and west side of the park as well, that should help us narrow it down. We have an eastward road that's going to lead us away more towards the city itself, and we have a nice main road that should be pretty prominent on the map, so this should help us figure it out as well. But again, the car park itself was fairly distinct in terms of the size and the layout of it, so even if we get into the right general area, that should pop up pretty prominently on the map. There's the major road that we're looking at, and just to the south of it, we have seen the car park on the map already. We realize, yep, we're right in the middle of it, several lanes. And we finally realized that's the one with the beach on the west and the water to the east. Yeah, it all lines up pretty nicely. So we just got to look through and pick which of the rows we're in here. Thankfully, since it is such a large map, considering it is covering the sides of the Pacific Ocean, the pinpointing is going to be pretty generous, especially compared to the last map we did in the city. So we don't even have to get it exactly perfect as long as we're in the right spot. We counted 3 rows up. We actually did miscount. It was that one farther up to the top, but that's more than close enough to get that perfect score. So we're happy with that, and we can move on to the next one. All right, so in round 2, we immediately see a sign with some Cyrillic on it, so we can say pretty confidently that that is going to be in Russia. And considering there isn't a ton of coastline on the eastern side of Russia, I'm pretty confident that we should be able to at least find something that will help us narrow it down. The problem is, though, that is relatively speaking, it still actually is quite a lot of coastline overall. Yep, and immediately we're thinking, well, Vladivostok is probably the most populated area, so there's a good chance that it probably is around that spot. But importantly, we do start on a fairly distinct piece of land with that spit that the road is on. It had water on both sides of it, so we're going to continue looking down the road and see if we can see any signs that indicate any nearby cities or markers that may be useful. But it should be enough. With the water being on both sides, that is a fairly distinct feature that should show up on some of the maps. So we're going to look through here and see if we can locate it. But it could take a while looking through these areas one by one until you find a part of the coastline that does match up. Get the orientation of the road since it is a nice long straight one. We're trying to look for sections of the road that match in this area, but unfortunately there isn't really anything that lines up correctly. It just doesn't look like we're seeing roads that are that straight in that orientation and that have water on both sides of it in the way that it is set up. So a little frustrating because it's just not quite matching up. This part of the road almost looks close in terms of the orientation, but it really just doesn't quite match up elsewhere as far as what we're seeing with the water and the other features that are around us. With 40 seconds left, though, we are running out of time, and I think the problem was fixating too much on this particular area around Vladivostok did limit us because there are other spots along the coastline that really should have been worth checking out, and maybe if I paid more attention to the details of the topography, we could have figured out, or at least seen on the map along the coastline, the spot that does match up with it. Unfortunately, this is not the case, and we realize as we're looking through this that, yeah, the place we put the marker down really doesn't look that correct. Hopefully, maybe it's just a mismatch with the maps and landscape, which sometimes happens in certain scenarios. But No, at this point, I think we're just going to have to hope for the best and hope that we are close enough. Yeah, and unfortunately, we were not in the right spot. And now that you see it, yes, that does look like it matches up a lot better. Perhaps if we did zoom in on that area to begin with, we could have seen that spit and pinned it down. So we did lose quite a lot of points there, unfortunately. But well done to my opponent because they did manage to pinpoint it. And knowing that, that does mean that going forward with this game, unless they choke the next several rounds, the game is in their hands. So most likely, we give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they're going to get it right from here. So we're probably not going to win this game. At best, we can salvage a draw from the competition. In the back of our heads, we do know that since we won the last game on Andorra, albeit very narrowly, we do have the advantage going into this one. So worst case scenario, we do get the draw. Best case scenario, if they made a mistake, we could be able to catch up. But at this point, it's just we're going to do the best we can and see what we can manage to salvage out of this game. So right away with this particular area, we see the signs in Spanish. So it does narrow it down to at least somewhere along the American coastline down through South America. The look of the area is fairly distinct with this desert-like landscape and the ocean off to the south, or rather to the southwest. So right away, the initial assumption is thinking Peru, because there is a large stretch along the Peruvian coastline that does have this orientation with the ocean off to that direction, and does have this general look to it with a lot of the sand and the desert-like features that go up to the shore. So that's what we're thinking. We're going to look down the road here and see if we can find any signs that can help us narrow it down a little bit. But already in the back of our head, that's likely where we're going to be checking out when we do decide to zoom into the map, with about a minute and a half left to go here. Now, worth noting that we do see a couple geographic features, and that is a small head jutting out to our east, as you can see in the distance there, which is fairly prominent and does stick out quite a bit from the orientation of the road we're on. And then also to the west as well, there is another small head jutting out as well. So hopefully those two can be used to narrow down where we're at, or at least get hopefully a general idea of where along this part of the coastline we're in. There is what we're looking at. It looks like a dry riverbed flowing underneath the bridge that we're on to start. So potentially that could show up on the map somewhere in terms of maybe the topography. It likely looks like it's not going to show up in the form of an actual river, but it's worth checking out to see if any of these slight valleys on the map there line up. And that's the one we're looking at that we saw. Doesn't quite line up exactly because we don't see any restaurants or something nearby as indicated on the map, but at least it does look in the general location matching up to what we're seeing. So with 15 seconds left, we don't have a whole lot more time to pinpoint it. I think we are fairly comfortable with where we're at least in the right general spot, knowing that we probably didn't pinpoint it, but at least, we're going to be in the right area. And again, in this scenario, the match is probably lost already, so not too worried about getting it perfect. Sure enough, yeah, we were in the right general location, but too far away to actually pinpoint it. We lost about 400 points there, which is disappointing, but after the catastrophic second round, it's not really a huge deal, going forward. So we do have a sign that tells us for this round that we're in the Philippines. So this can be tricky because it's a big country and there are a lot of small towns marked along the coastline. So if we're just going through it one by one, it can take a while to find something that matches up. But at least we know that we're limited to the coast itself, and we don't have to search for any inland spots as well. So here we go down the road, seeing if we get any signs that tell us something about the region we're in, the province we're in, the city we're in, and use that to start narrowing it down and trying to at least get some candidate positions that we can evaluate if they look correct. So this sign is actually quite nice. It does tell us the province we're in and the city we're in as well. So we're going to use those two and just essentially now go through the map and see if we can find Samar is the province, and then hard to exactly make out exactly what the city name is, but it does start with a B. Bowengan, Beauregard. The idea is that if we do see it, it should pop out, and we should be able to figure out which one it is regardless. But we do see Samar Island now, and we see there it is. It was Beauregard City in the end. So now with a minute and a half left, we should have more than enough time to pinpoint this. We do have a road jutting off to the north, and one going off to the east with some water and a beach just off to our north as well. So plenty of good clues here. This should be more than enough to find it, but we're just going to take a look at some of the orientations of the nearby roads and see if we can get one that looks correct. That's looking pretty good. That road does seem to line up with the orientation of the one we traveled down, and we do have a road jutting off to the north towards the water that is gated, as long as one going off to the east as well. So yeah, pretty confident that's it, and sure enough, yeah, that is the right spot. So with 4 rounds down, we go on to our last one, and right away, it's screaming New Zealand. You got the big mountains, you've got those black and white chevrons, you've got the yellow road signs. Everything about it already just looks very New Zealandish. So let's take a look and see. Yep, Skevington's Road. We at least now have a road that we can remember for when we do need to pinpoint it later, but we're going to take a jog down the road here and see if we can get any useful signs that indicate maybe where along the coastline we are going to be. There's a railroad track just near us, so that may come in handy too, because those are useful for pinpointing on the maps. Schoolhouse Road. So with about a minute and a half left, we're still not finding any signs that are going to help us narrow it down. However, the topography is going to help us out quite a bit. Those mountains have a lot of prominence, and they are very close to the coast, so that does limit down potentially the options of where we're going to be. It likely is the South Island as a result of that, and already actually we zoom into an area that we see roads that match up, and sure enough, there's Skevington. So yeah, using the mountains helped out quite a bit once we actually just looked at the map to see where they were close to the coastline like that and had quite, that level of prominence. It wasn't too long before the right roads jumped out at us, and sure enough, yeah, we started right by the intersection, got the perfect score. So overall, not a bad game. It really just was the big mistake in the second round that cost me. Could have been a little better in the third round too, but at that point, we're splitting hairs since it had already been thrown away. Congratulations to my opponent, Walk Lock, because that was a really strong round that they played. I'm sure they were a little disappointed not to get the perfect score as well on the Peruvian round, but overall, definitely a well-earned win on that map. And I am quite happy to get the draw against them with the win on the first map as well. So I feel like that was a good contest. Although I'm still a little bit disappointed about throwing away the perfect score on the first game. So that was week 3, a really fun one. Enjoyed it. Looking ahead for week 4, we're going to be playing another Irish map, this time with all 32 counties involved. So that'll be a fun one. And then also the Brazilian city of Manaus, which is going to be tricky. It is a big city, and it's laid out in a relatively complicated fashion. So we'll do a little bit of practice and see how we do. But it should be a fun one as well. Looking forward to it.